The last decade brought the people of Canada many things. Some were good, and some not so much. One of the topics that were center stage in the public square was various topics around gender. Although there remains various aspects to this conversation, from gender fluidity and transgenderism, and a host of things in between, one thing that seems to have been forgotten is the rights and protection of those who identify as biologically female, or the 99% of women in the country. In this episode, I am joined by Catherine Logan, who is an advocate for biological female rights, and I am going to take the opportunity to dig into this a bit more. Should be fun. Good afternoon, Catherine, and welcome to the show.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Some may be wondering why there is a need to advocate for the rights and protection of biological females. I myself would have thought this was an obvious state of being for a woman in Canada, as the Charter of Rights and Freedoms encompasses every Canadian. But in some of the conversations that I have had recently, I'm learning that I may be mistaken in this regard. Can you explain what exactly you were advocating for?
Well, that's a good question to start off with. And one of the things that I'm advocating for is for changes to Bill C16. And if you're not quite familiar with Bill C16, it was an amendment added to the Human Rights Act in 2017. Actually, that's when it received royal assent. And it covers a lot of topics about gender identity and expression, which is coming to fruition in today's current Canadian society by limiting the words that we can say or use. And also it is infringing on the rights and safeties now of biological females in Canada. What I am concerned about is that the protection of females in once female designated spaces like change rooms, bathrooms, even prisons is being infringed upon by those individuals who are simply identifying as trans women. So they're not going through the process of transition, either medically picking the medications or surgically. They are simply saying, hey, I'm female, and because of C16, they are being allowed certain freedoms, I would say, or rights that are having a negative impact on Canadian women. And that's deeply concerning and very, very frightening, especially when you have people that are potentially using Bill C16 who are predators, and they are just being given the freedom to utilize once safe spaces for biological women and girls. I am also advocating for the release of the gender-based analysis for Bill C16, which has, interestingly enough, not been made public. And requests for the release of the GBA have been repeatedly denied. The entire report was redacted on the grounds of cabinet confidence. And recently, there have been at least two Conservative MPs, Dianne Finlay and Alan Rees, who have declined to take the e-petition to the House of Commons for parliamentary response.
That's ironic, considering that the Conservatives have always maintained that they would hold the government accountable for the transparency relating to C16.
Yeah, it is ironic. I don't understand why Dianne Finlay would not have accepted the role of taking this e-petition forward, as one would think that as a democratically elected biological female in a position of power, that she would echo the concerns brought forward by Senator Linda Frum and by others.
So how did you get involved in all of this?
That's an interesting question, because I don't really label myself as a feminist. Going by the definitions of second wave and third wave feminists, I don't really feel like I fall into that. I am a biological woman, and I am a mother of a child who is an athlete, an athletic coach. I have a daughter and a son, so their futures are always of my concern. I have had friends who have been abused by male partners. There's been a couple situations where friends of the family have actually been murdered by men. So I think all of those personal experiences put together has made me more empathic to, the need and the right as a female, and even as a man, to be safe in Canadian society, even just worldwide.
You seem to be drawing a distinction in terms of safety between men and women and whether you were biologically one or the other. Am I hearing this right?
Yeah, safety is definitely a big issue. I think there's a lot more encompassing just more than just safety.
Mm-hmm.
But I would think that, or I feel that safety is definitely a bigger part of it, for sure. Especially, as I said, when we have people that are now exploiting the loopholes in C16 for their own benefit.
We'll get to C16 a little bit later. The last time I checked, there were some 72 genders and a host of pronouns to go along with them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I may be old school, but I still believe that there are only 2 genders. Am I missing something?
Actually, I thought there was more than 72. I thought there was about 76, but yeah. Well, then I would probably be considered old school as well, that there's 2 biological sexes. Your chromosomes dictate whether you're male or whether you're female. People throw in the intersex people that, are born with physiological genitalia of both sexes. However, from my understanding, even with those people that are intersex, they have hormones or hormone levels that either are more masculine or more feminine. But when you come down to it, there's a balance. There's male, there's female.
Most of the narrative that I have seen states that gender is nothing more than a social construct and is different from biological sex. Personally, I've always rejected this notion, as gender has always been a way to describe the masculine and the feminine. Do you see a difference between gender and biological sex?
All right. So, I was thinking about that question here. And, I look at the mind as being something that can be programmed and can be altered. Your physiological self, your biological self, can be altered externally, but your chemical makeup is your chemical makeup. You can't really change that.
At least without medical intervention.
Yeah, exactly. But even if you're cutting off parts or adding parts, your core is essentially one or the other.
Yeah.
Your mind can be changed, I believe, to, the human mind can be changed to believe anything. Like, look at something like the Stockholm syndrome, where you have hostages who start developing empathy or compassion for the hostage takers. That's, mental programming or mental changes that way. So, when you come down to gender as being something of the mind, and you have biological sex, which is, your physical, concrete state, I don't believe your biological sex can change. You can think whatever you want, whether you decide to change that or not, and you can change your physical self, but your core stays ultimately the same.
How does that differentiate from gender, as I don't think they are the same thing?
Yeah.
You have your biological sex, which is either male or female, which is dictated by your DNA.
Mm-hmm.
You can't change that reality unless you start tinkering with your DNA, and I hope that level of technology doesn't exist yet, which makes biological sex immutable.
Yes.
Then you have gender, which has always been used to refine the differences between masculine and feminine.
Mm-hmm.
But that remains a binary choice.
Right.
You have male, female, or masculine and feminine.
Mm-hmm.
There are no other options. Further, there has never been a time in our history where gender was anything different than this, and there is no recent science that I am aware of that changes this.
Yeah. No, and I haven't come across anything either that scientifically says that your gender is who you are. My personal interpretation of gender is, your thoughts and feelings, and those change on a daily basis. They change with experiences and, education and things like that. But to legally define yourself based on thoughts and feelings is quite different than what you are biologically, physiologically, chemically. There's really no way to change that biological self. And that's who you came into this world as. And that's how you should be identified. Thoughts and feelings really, to me, don't seem to have a legal basis for determining who exactly you are. Because, as I said, you can change that on a daily basis.
I suspect it would be very difficult relative to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to attempt to do so. And how would you define that in any meaningful way to make government policy or create laws?
Mm-hmm.
Because in the end, feelings don't matter.
Yeah.
Canada's contribution to this, of course, is Bill C16, which you mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
How would you characterize the essence of C16, and why do you believe it's an issue for biological females?
I'm going to just read a little bit of the definition of C16 just to set the premise of it. So the law amends the Canadian Human Rights Act by adding quote-unquote gender identity or expression as a prohibited ground of discrimination. That makes it illegal to deny services, employment, accommodation, or similar benefits to individuals based on their gender identity or gender expression to matters within federal jurisdictions such as federal government, federal services, and federally regulated industries. So, a person who benefits because of gender identity or expression of another person could be liable to provide monetary reimbursement. So we have here this bill that's legally saying that if you decide one day to identify as the opposite sex, that you have to be identified as that, and that you have a legal precedent to go after somebody else.
So what would happen in this scenario? I see a person with short hair and I automatically assume it's a male.
Mm-hmm.
So if I walk up to them and say something like, "Excuse me, sir," or something similar, and that person is indeed a male, but he identifies as a female, what are the repercussions to me based on what I just did?
Well, in this day and age, misgendering or dead naming can actually get you sued.
Dead naming?
Dead naming. That is referring to the quote-unquote dead name of the person who has either transitioned or who is identifying as the opposite gender. So, for instance, somebody whose Bill was born Bill, and that was on their birth certificate, has now transitioned or identifies as Barbara, and you refer to that person as Bill, and that Barbara now becomes offended because either you use the name Bill, that's dead naming. Bill is now dead.
Seriously, that's a thing.
Yes, that is a thing. Same with pronouns. So if you decided to use the he, him, his pronouns with Barbara, again, grounds to be sued. And I have a personal experience with this, and with my own child who was reprimanded in elementary school for misgendering a classmate. And this was not done intentionally. This was a classmate that my son had known since junior kindergarten as female. And just during conversation, playtime, identified that child as a girl, and he was reprimanded by the school for misgendering this now young person who identifies as male. So as I sat in the office listening to my son being reprimanded for misgendering this child, and looking at the guidance counselor who was also giving me the stink eye because I guess I was being considered a bad parent for not educating my child well enough on gender expression, I had to deal with my own child being confused as to why he was being punished when he meant no harm. Thank goodness this was an incident that happened in school and he wasn't an adult where he could be sued. But at the same time, it was just, this is a child. We are reframing or reprogramming the verbal capacity and the brains of children now so that they have to second guess all the time who they're speaking to, how they're going to address that person. Am I going to hurt their feelings because I say the wrong thing or use the wrong pronoun? C16 is just the tip of the iceberg. I look in this whole gender ideological war that we seem to be on right now, or in right now.
I'm trying to wrap my head around what you've just said. Mm-hmm. In the first example with Bill and Barbara, if Bill became Barbara and actually transitioned, mm-hmm. which I assume means surgery, hormone therapy, etc., mm-hmm. then I would expect to see a person with traditional female characteristics, even though that person is still biologically a male. Therefore, the likelihood of misgendering is extremely low because people exclusively assume gender based on physical characteristics. Mm-hmm. The trap to me seems to be that if a person wakes up one morning and decides to identify as the opposite of what their biological sex is, then that creates a liability as the person won't know. Mm-hmm. They are making a rational assumption based on appearance and are proceeding accordingly.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's where I think we need mind reading. We're getting to that stage now where we have to really be empathic and be able to interpret the cues and whatever else based on our conditioning of what the other person identifies as, especially if they don't come across to you and say, hey, my pronouns are, X, Y, and Z. You're not going to know.
I guess I'm in a lot of trouble, as my wife will attest to. I can't read minds very well, or at all. So to be clear on this, if I am in a social gathering mm-hmm. and I see a person who has the outward physical characteristics of a man, and I go over to introduce myself, strike up a conversation, and during the conversation, I call this person him or sir, and it turns out that while he is in fact a biological male, he's identifying as a female, at least today. Then if he is so inclined, he could take me to court, and I am now subject to whatever penalties of law that C16 introduced, all because he didn't say mm-hmm. anything, and I made the normal assumption that he is a male because that's what he looks like.
From what I understand, yes, yeah. And gender expression is a very thin ice topic because you have males that are biological males that look biologically male, beards, mustaches, beards, facial hair, who are proclaiming that they are female and are demanding access to female designated spaces because they are identifying as female. And there was a case just recently in the UK where a woman lost her job because she identified her coworker as male, and pictures on social media showed this coworker with full facial hair, but on that one day in particular, he identified as she, and either this woman who was fired didn't realize it or what, but she was fired, and apparently this employee who has been gender fluid had been known in this company to arrive at work different days with different gender expressions and expecting the coworkers to abide by that gender of the day. So you have to wonder, how do you keep up with people like that? So you have legitimate persons who are going through the transgender or gender reassignment process, surgically, pharmacologically. And then, that's a deeply entailed process. And then you have those that are just wishy-washy and expecting everybody to comply.
That brings me back to an earlier comment, which is how are you supposed to know unless that person tells you specifically what the identity is? Mm-hmm. This seems to be a made-for-government paradox where people will run afoul of the law through no fault of their own. Mm-hmm. Listening to myself say this makes me wonder how something like this could have ever passed the common sense test and become law. Mm-hmm. Do you know of any instances where this has been legally tested? I am also talking about a real court of law. not some provincial human rights tribunal.
Yeah. I believe that there have been actually some cases of lawsuits at least that I know of in the U.S. of either misgendering or dead naming. And there was some talk at least in Canada, about one particular individual who was going after female immigrant estheticians last year, who was threatening to sue media corporations for misgendering.
Is he alone, or are there others doing this? He's the only one that I have ever heard of, but wondering if there are any more.
From what I've seen, there is more. And from what I understand as well, even in the trans community, there is great division where there are some that are fully in support of this Canadian who took immigrant women estheticians to BC Rights Human Tribunal Court.
And he lost in the end, did he not?
He did, yes. And he was actually ordered to pay these estheticians because I think at least one of them had to close down her business. And recently, this person also was arrested on weapons charges for brandishing an illegal taser on YouTube. So there's that side that is supporting this person, and then there's the other side who are saying that examples such as this one Canadian are actually bringing a lot of discredit to legitimate trans people who are wanting, to live their lives as a human being in the body that they feel most comfortable with. They are seeking better medical help, or at least even mental health treatment, to help themselves and help even the youth with gender or body dysphoria. So there's seems to be two different camps there. You also have now, at least in the LGBT community, more divisions as well, because you have lesbians and homosexuals who are being labeled transphobic because they don't want to date or be in relationships with transsexual individuals.
This just sounds like another example of political correctness run amok.
Yes, it seems to be, yeah. Yeah, it just seems that somebody else's comfort or gender expression is paramount over another's rights.
If I was to take this in a different direction and suddenly found myself being single and a trans person expressed interest, and I in turn would say, sorry, I don't play for the home team and I prefer biological females, which would seem to be a legitimate answer. Under C16, I could still face legal penalties?
I don't know if that specifically could result in that, I'm not a legal professional. However, from what I have been seeing, at least on social media, is that you can be attacked for being labeled transphobic because you don't want to entertain that kind of a relationship.
Within the trans community, why haven't there been more vocal pushback against this? I mean, it can't be doing them much good.
Well, unfortunately, I really can't speak as representative of the transgender community. I only can go by what I have read and heard from others that are speaking out, against a lot of the hypocrisy in the transgender movement. Blair White, and she's a transgender woman in the U.S. who also is a conservative and has a series of YouTube videos talking about the issues within the transgender community and how there are individuals that are using gender expression in order to act as predators, either towards children or, just other members of the community. And her breakdown of situations is, in my opinion, at least, done very eloquently and, commonsensically. She doesn't get into any of the legal aspects, but she's just highlighting that there's these situations that are coming up and that are really weakening the support of the transgender community. Going back to C16, it's an amendment to the criminal code. So that's where we need to begin, is either repeal that or reword it or fix this somehow. Because right now we have predators using or with the ability to use the criminal code to justify their reasons to prey upon biological females. You also have organizations like, just recently, Good Life Fitness has on its policy, on its website, that somebody, a male, who identifies as female, is entitled to use a women's only change room. So women's only change room, women's only showers, washrooms. This is on their policy in public view. For those women that have addressed this with Good Life Fitness, they have been told that if it's a concern for a biological female, she can discuss this with management of Good Life Fitness and will be possibly accommodated with another space to change in. So a biological woman now is no longer able to use a change room that was initially designated as women's only, because now there's potentially a biological male in there who says that they're a woman. And they are using C16 to justify this amendment, and that person is using C16 to justify their quote-unquote right to use a female-only space.
How does Good Life verify the claim that they have been told? Based on what you're saying, I could wake up one morning, choose to identify as a female, and head into the female change room with no consequences.
Well, according to the Good Life website, is that they have to at least indicate to management their gender expression.
Then back to my scenario, all I have to do is make the people at the desk aware of my newfound gender expression and then mosey on into the change room?
From what I understand, it's reviewed on a case-by-case basis. So from what I understand, have to be a member for one to be able to access the change room.
Fair enough.
And then tell management of your gender expression and you will be accommodated.
Wow.
Yeah, so paying biological female members who...
must be leaving, I gotta think.
That I can't say for sure. However, they are being now moved out of their own change rooms or their own spaces, their own classes.
So what do they do?
That I really, I can't tell you. Either if you gotta go, you hold it and wait till you can find a female-only bathroom. If that's not available, I don't know.
But the problem there is that a female bathroom never accounted for gender expression and always assumed biology.
And that's one of the things that organizations such as the Canadian Women's Sex-Based Rights Group is fighting against. They're challenging C16 because they're seeing that people just identifying as female are being given access to women's prisons, the bathrooms, classes, change rooms, whatever else. And from what I am seeing is that there are actually a number of different feminist groups, American, Canadian, in UK as well, that are speaking out against this. They are challenging their governments, writing to their members of parliament, to get this stuff addressed. These changes made. There's a movement right now with removing trans women from female-only sports. We have the Tokyo Olympics coming up shortly, and the Olympic Committee is allowing trans women into once female-only designated sporting categories. Even with the monitoring of testosterone levels, that doesn't seem to be enough to keep trans women out of the sporting arena with women's only sports. Biological females are being injured, especially in team sports, when they are playing against a biological man identifying as a woman. Women's records are being smashed by transgender women. We have, so you have a very small segment of the population that is being given allowances that are removing opportunities for biological women to compete in the sports that they have trained for, most of their lives, put in a lot of money for into as well.
Time and effort and
yeah, exactly. Sweat, pain. This is happening on a high school level, college or post-secondary level, and now on the Olympic level. Soon it's going to be a men-only sports, like the Olympics were when they were first discovered or formulated in ancient Greece. How is this going to benefit women's sports? It's not. These transgender women athletes are proving to have an advantage over biological women, and it's an unfair advantage. And then you're going to have biological females who are being denied the opportunity to participate in a sport that they have loved and worked for. So, that just totally goes against the women's rights that our grandmothers and great-grandmothers fought for.
Where do you think this ends?
Well, at this point in time, there's a huge imbalance. We have the feminists that are standing up again or continually for biological female rights. And we have certain segments of the transgender activists or transgender right activists who are threatening, bullying feminists in order to prevent them from speaking out against, things like Bill 16 but just being or allowing transgender women to participate in women's only sports and access change rooms and things like that. What I've noted to date is that you don't have transgender men that are forcing their way into men's sports or men's bathrooms or, men's change rooms. It just seems to be the transgender women that are aggressively, or at least some of them in the transgender rights area, that are aggressively attacking feminists who are trying to stand up for rights. And it had seemed for a bit that feminists were, at least some of them were paving the way for transgenderism to be accepted, embracing these individuals who are identifying as women and, trying to accept them into the community. And now you have this stance where when something is being addressed because it's incorrect or it's imbalanced, now we have the attacks happening. We have rape crisis centers being defunded and closed because they refuse to accept transgender women clients because their biological female clients feel threatened by having a man or biological male in their midst.
Especially if he looks like a male.
Yes, exactly. Especially if he looks like a male. You have also women's or feminist speeches or events being censored or shut down by transgender activists because they don't want them speaking out against the problems with C16 and the encroachment of transgender women into biological female-only spaces and events. There was the event last year in Toronto where the Toronto librarian refused to cancel a feminist speaking engagement. She was being pressured by even government politicians and transgender activists to shut down a well-known feminist activist from speaking.
What would be the ideal result in your eyes relative to what you're advocating for?
Well, I'll speak on this from two fronts. And the first one is that we do need to get back to honoring women's rights. We know women have fought long and hard for the right of property ownership and just, the right to vote, even the right to be identified or recognized legally as a person. To allow the rights of one group to superimpose or surpass the rights of another is not going to be of benefit to any one side, male, female, whatever. So, from that aspect, we need to get a balance. We need to really focus on women's issues too. We are fighting that one battle with the transgender issue. But we also have to start looking at mental and physical health issues of men and women. From what I understand and what my research has said is that there really isn't a lot of research or work being done into addressing gender dysphoria. What are the causes of it? And it seems to be right now that the one way of treating it is with medicines, causing sterilization and surgery. Yet, there does not seem to be a lot of support afterward for the mental health of these people that have gone through that process or who are considering going through that process. So I think we're failing society there by just doing the medication and cutting instead of trying to find out what are the root causes of this and trying to at least address that part of it.
But whose responsibility would that be?
Whose responsibility would that be? I think that's society as a whole. Society to demand it, to society to really look into the medical profession, the medical professionals themselves too. Just to do that research. I think humanity as a whole, we have to really look at it because it's impacting everybody.
Well, it's impacting a very small segment of society who obviously has issues.
Yes,
right?
But it's a ripple effect too. You have a small group who are, their demands, at least for this very small group, are now, it's having a ripple effect on everything. We just going back to our discussion earlier, we can't say certain things anymore. We can't, accidentally misgender or dead name somebody without fear of legal reprisals. I think we've stopped looking at what value human life has. We have people put into workplace situations to fill a quota. It's, in some cases, unqualified people to fill a quota. And it's just a number. It's not looking at the value that person could have in another situation or how that person's misqualifications impacts that whole. We've gone from being valuable contributors to a society to just simple numbers on a stat sheet. We have the feeling culture that has just seemed to surpass everything else. And it's, in my opinion, it's just becoming a detriment. We, just for our post-secondary institutions, for example, are promoting how many women are in a program, not the strength of the program anymore. It's how many women are graduating. And in some cases are lowering entrance requirements for women. So what are they trying to say? Are women stupid? Do women need a less stringent system in order to be accepted into some programs instead of getting in by their own merit and their skills and challenging biological women to be better, to strengthen themselves? They're lowering the bar so that they can, post-secondary institutions can look great. They can look woke, as you said, that because they have so many women in the programs. So then you have biological females graduating from programs, or potentially graduating from programs, with maybe a substandard skill set. So I don't think I'd want for instance, a female who graduated from an architectural program, building the tower that I'm going to be living in, who was just permitted to the program because she met certain criteria. She was allowed to go through the program with less checks and balances, and she ended up contributing to a building that possibly collapsed because she just didn't have the skill set. And she potentially could have taken the place of another female who was a stronger candidate. We're not doing ourselves any favors by pandering to any one group.
No, but that seems to be what is happening across all levels of government.
So a couple of the issues that I wanted to address with the problems with C16, one of them pertains to Stats Canada and the RCMP no longer collecting information on the biological sex of those arrested or charged with certain crimes. And the impact that this is having is that Canada is no longer keeping an accurate statistical data bank of information on certain crimes. So your gender expression is paramount over what your biological identity is. So this has an impact on even just crimes against women. So the person who has committed a crime can go in and basically claim that their gender expression is this. They've committed a crime, and it'll be recorded as that specific gender expression and not their biological identity.
So how is that helpful to anyone?
I don't understand how that would be helpful, other than it's just now skewing crime statistics.
But wouldn't that skew the results away from men to women? For instance, I am a biological man, and if I chose to identify as a woman, then that is what is going to be captured on the arrest report and then ultimately in the stats that are gathered. Mm-hmm. Over time, there would be a perceived increase in crime from women, which would be false.
Yeah, exactly. I'm looking at it that this is tampering with statistics. We will not have any accurate picture of who is committing what kind of crimes, and therefore, if you don't have that kind of data, then how are you supposed to be able to fix it? How are you supposed to adjust the system?
That would have untold impacts, as the data is often used for policy, and like other issues such as climate change, gun control, etc., without valid data, the ability of the government to pass sensible legislation is eroded.
Yeah, exactly. So you can't create new policies, and probably can't even enforce policies because you just don't have that background information anymore.
Creating policy in the absence of facts or data has never been an issue for the new era of Liberals, as C16 and other dubious policies have clearly demonstrated.
I would also think that it has an impact on funding if you don't have a proper number of crime statistics. Say, for instance, I'll just say male youth. If you don't have that information, how are you going to be able to provide funding for organizations that their purpose is to keep male youth from committing crime?
You won't be able to, and that funding will be diverted to other groups now based on the collected data, which is now flawed. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there are a host of advocacy groups that won't mind getting more money, whether they should or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you also have now a criminal justice system that is allowing biological males expressing themselves or identifying as female being transferred or put into female-only prisons. Now you have incidences where you have female inmates, biological female inmates, housed with biological males, and now the incidences of sexual abuse, rape in female correctional facilities is rising, and that's not being addressed. You have women inmates who are already in a situation where they have significant amount of limitations and are vulnerable, and now they are being further abused by prisoners and with no recourse at this time to stop this abuse.
That scenario you're painting would seem to be obvious to anyone remotely paying attention. Mm-hmm. You're going to put men who have been convicted of violent crimes, mm-hmm. and some of which who are predatory, into a location surrounded by biological females. Mm-hmm. These men have physical superiority, limited filters, and you just gave them what amounts to a buffet table, and then stuff goes wrong. Mm-hmm. How could this have ended any other way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not turning up very good results at all. As I said, the incidences of abuse and grooming and of a female inmates is rising. So you look at correctional facilities as a place where potentially those who've committed crime, do their time. The purpose is to reform so they don't do that again. But if they're in a situation now where they're being abused by the system that's supposed to reform them, they're going to be put back out on the street even more damaged than what they went in there for.
That's a scary thought.
It is terrifying. And, and then rape can result in pregnancy. Then you have unwanted children being born, and I just see a whole snowball of negative impacts here. And, you have a vulnerable section of society being caged, and it's the wolf that's patrolling the henhouse.
I can only imagine the level of failures that would have to have happened along the way for this to actually see the light of day.
Yeah, there's a serious need for reforms. In February 15th at the Ottawa Public Library, there is actually a symposium happening on the status of women's prisons and addressing the issues with C16 going on. And I think that's actually would be a really good insight for some people to hear about from a former inmate on what exactly is happening in our correctional facilities.
I don't know. I suspect I would come away from attending such an event very angry at the stupidity that was allowed to happen.
Anger can be a good thing if used constructively. It's a motivator to correct injustices. But I also look at anger as some way clouds common sense. And, we really have to look at this whole issue with C16. Women are angry. It's not, just feminists angry. Like, all women should be angry. Whether you're a mother, whether you're not a mother, just looking at what we are being reduced to and what C16 is attempting to take away and erode from us. But, at the same time, we've got to go about this with a lot of common sense, at least, clarity of thought and clarity of intention.
Well, that's part of the problem. Common sense in the policy space isn't that common. If it was,
no,
we wouldn't be talking about how much of a failure C16 really is.
Yeah, that's true.
If someone is looking for more information or wants to get involved, how would they go about doing that?
Well, there's actually a few ways. First of all, starting with your MP and writing to your MP to either get more information or to write your MP about the concerns with C16. I don't know if there's a lot of MPs that are really familiar with the ramifications of C16. And right now there's an attempt to get the gender-based analysis information out or to be released by the government, and that's being stonewalled for some reason. There's been a few attempts to go to various female MPs to have this gender-based analysis released, and it's just being met with silence. So what exactly is being hidden, is under question, and, even the fact that has it actually been done. The Canadian Organization of Canadian Women's Sex-Based Rights is, I believe, a newer organization that is tackling a lot of these issues facing Canadian women, as well as Save Women's Sports. So there's actually a few in the UK and in the US that are advocating for biological female athletes. And they're putting information out about the impacts of transgender women on biological female-only sports. So there's a lot of good information online. As I mentioned as well, the public speaking events in Ottawa, and there's supposed to be one coming up in Vancouver at the Vancouver Public Library. However, at this time, there's a movement on to shut down the Vancouver speaking engagement. And I am currently aware that there will be at least an e-petition coming up to release the gender-based analysis report on C16. And I haven't heard what the status is of that yet. So, there are a few things. Social media can be a cesspool of a lot of negativity, and you have to really use a lot of discernment when reading through that. However, there is a lot of information and organizations out there that are researching and doing the legwork in order to bring public awareness issues like C16 and issues like women or trans women in biological female sports and the like. So there is a wealth of knowledge out there. You just have to do some research and, of course, ask questions. But in order for us to have an impact, we have to speak out. We have to start contacting our MPs. That's what they were voted in for, to represent us. Make them aware that this is an issue. Make them aware that changes have to be made. That this is, C16, for instance, is a threat. If we don't speak out against it, it's just going to keep steamrolling, snowballing and become bigger and bigger. I don't think biological females can afford the luxury of just being ignorant of politics and public policies. I can speak for myself that for a long time, politics and even public policies was not a huge interest for me. I was at one point raising my kids, didn't have much time working, and I was distracted, and realizing now that there was a lot of things pushed forward right under my nose that if I would have had more awareness about, I would have probably been a lot more vocal, and we need to pay attention
100%
of what's going on.
That's one of the biggest problems facing the Western world today, is the detachment of the people from what the government is doing, and the people have no idea what is going on until it's too late.
Yes.
C16 is one example, but this is the reality for pretty much every issue out there today.
Yes. Ignorance is strength for the politicians.
Absolutely.
Not for the regular person.
Absolutely. I'm going to have to stop it there. I would like to thank you for joining me today, Catherine. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me on.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I recall having a brief discussion with my local MP about some hypothetical situations that C16 could introduce, and I remember him downplaying those situations, citing common sense as a vehicle that would negate them. Human nature is what it is, and when you combine that embedded nature along with the political left ideology and throw in some cultural relativism and deconstructionism, it's hard to imagine how C16 and its associated changes to the criminal code could have unfolded any other way. The path back to normalcy will be long and hard as we reclaim our political process and return government to being an instrument for the people. The first step that must happen for this to be achieved is a renewed involvement from the people, reconnecting with the political process and demanding common sense from our elected officials and holding them accountable when they do the opposite. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I would like to thank you for listening. Please give us a like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're listening to this on YouTube, please also click the notification bell so you'll be notified when there is a new episode. If you have suggestions, comments, or would like to express constructive feedback, please drop us an email at mailbag@thepeoplesconversation.ca. We always enjoy hearing from our listeners, even those that disagree with us. Also, please visit our Patreon page and donate to the show. Your donation will help us to do more and will expand the content that we are able to provide. Finally, always remember that a country without basic freedoms, especially freedom of speech, is a country without a future. Until next time, stay safe and be well.